Story 1. I need to tell you what kind of house I lived in before I tell you what happened inside it, because the house itself is part of the story in a way that matters. I'm 32 now. At the time of this story, I was 28, and I was renting a house in a neighborhood in Raleigh that sits on the transition line between older residential and newer development. The kind of neighborhood where a renovated Craftsman sits next to a vacant lot that used to be something and will be something again. My house was one of the Craftsman ones, built in the late 30s, with original windows that didn't seal quite right in winter and hardwood floors that communicated every footstep through the whole structure, and a basement that I used for storage and avoided otherwise, because basements in houses that old have a quality of darkness that is specific and not entirely comfortable. I had lived there for 18 months. I knew every sound the house made. That is not a figure of speech. I knew the sound the third stair made under weight, which was different from any other stair. I knew the sound the kitchen pipes made when the water pressure dropped in the evening. I knew the sound the back door made when the wind came from the east, a specific rattle in the upper frame that I had learned to predict from the weather. I knew my house and my body, and in my sleep the way you know a place you've paid attention to for 18 months of living alone in it. I am telling you this because the thing I'm about to describe was not something I misidentified or misinterpreted. I knew what was my house and what wasn't, and what I heard on a Tuesday night in February was not my house. My roommate at the time, a woman named Caroline, had been gone for 4 days visiting family in Charlotte and was returning the following day. I was alone in the house, which was normal and comfortable, and I had spent the evening the way I spent most Tuesday evenings, cooking something reasonable, working for a couple of hours, reading for an hour before bed. I was in bed by 10:30, which was earlier than usual, but I had an early meeting the next morning, and I was already half asleep by 10:40. I woke up at 12:17. I checked my phone, which I keep on the nightstand, and the time was 12:17, and I was completely awake in the way that I sometimes wake from a sound rather than naturally. My body was awake before my mind had caught up, and my mind was already in the process of identifying why. I lay still and I listened. The house was quiet, the specific quiet of a cold February night in a house with old windows, which is a dense and pressurized quiet that has its own texture. I lay in it, and I listened to it, and I was about to decide I had woken spontaneously when I heard the third stair. The third stair from the bottom of the staircase that led from the ground floor to the second floor where my bedroom was. The specific sound that stair made under weight, which was a 2-part sound, a compression and then a slight release, that I had heard 1,000 times under my own foot. I had heard it under Caroline's foot. I had heard it under the foot of the plumber who'd come to fix the upstairs bathroom 6 months earlier. I knew that sound. I knew it was not any other sound in the house. It was the third stair under the weight of a person. Caroline was in Charlotte. I was in my bedroom. Someone was on my staircase. I want to tell you what I did, and what I thought in the order that I did, and thought them because I believe the sequence matters. The first thing I did was move my hand to my phone without sitting up, without any visible movement from the perspective of anyone in the doorway of my bedroom. The first thing I thought was that I needed to understand what I had before I acted on it, which is a habit of mind that I believe kept me from doing something that would have made my situation worse. I lay still. I held my phone under the covers with my thumb on the emergency call button, and I listened. No further sound from the staircase. The third stair had spoken, and then the house had gone silent again. I lay there for 3 minutes by the clock on my phone, and the staircase made no further sound. The hallway outside my bedroom door, which was open about 6 inches the way I always left it, was dark and still. Nothing moved in it. Nothing came through it. After 3 minutes, I heard movement from below. Not the staircase. The ground floor. Movement that was careful and unhurried. The movement of someone navigating a space in the dark with some familiarity, because they were not walking into things. Whoever was below me knew enough about the layout to move through it without running into furniture. I pressed the emergency call button. I whispered to the dispatcher that there was someone in my house, gave my address, said I was on the second floor, and I believed the person was on the ground floor. She told me to stay where I was and to barricade the bedroom door if possible and that police were on the way. I got up from the bed. I moved the desk chair under the bedroom door handle, which is something I had never done in my life before that moment, and which I did with a certainty and a speed that told me some part of my brain had already thought about what to do if this happened. I stood in the corner of my bedroom, farthest from the door with my phone in my hand, and I listened. The movement on the ground floor continued for approximately 4 more minutes. Not searching movement, not the frantic movement of someone looking for valuables. Slow, unhurried, the movement of someone who was in no particular hurry to be done with whatever they were doing. At one point I heard a sound I could not immediately identify from upstairs, and have since concluded was the sound of my kitchen drawer being opened and closed. One drawer, opened and closed once, and then nothing. At 12:30, the Raleigh PD arrived. I heard them at the front door, and I heard the voice of the first officer call out clearly, and I heard the ground floor go completely still for a beat, and then heard rapid movement that was nothing like the unhurried movement of the preceding minutes. I heard the back door, the distinctive rattle of the upper frame as it opened, which was the sound I knew from eastern winds, and I heard it close. The officers went through the house. They came upstairs and I let them in and I told them what I had heard and in what order. They went back downstairs with me and we went through the ground floor together. Nothing was missing. I want to say that because it was the first thing the officer asked and the answer genuinely surprised me. Nothing was obviously taken, no electronics, no cash, nothing I could identify as absent. Everything appeared to be where I had left it. The officer asked me to look carefully, and I did, and I found nothing missing. I found one thing different. On my kitchen counter, next to the stove, there was a mug. A ceramic mug from my own cabinet, one of 4 that lived in the cabinet above the coffee maker. It was sitting on the counter next to the stove, right side up, empty. I had not taken a mug out that evening. I had not had coffee or tea after dinner. The mug had been in the cabinet when I went to bed, and it was on the counter when I came downstairs with the police. The officer looked at the mug. He looked at me. He asked if I was certain I hadn't taken it out. I told him I was certain. He took a photograph of it. The back door's lock had not been forced. The officer examined it and told me it showed signs of being manipulated, a technique he described without going into detail that had allowed it to be opened without forcing it. He told me this was not uncommon in older locks of the type my back door had, and that I should have it replaced immediately. He told me to stay with a friend or family member that night, which I did. I called Caroline, and she came back from Charlotte that night, driving up at 2 in the morning, because she is that kind of person. The investigation found no one. The person who came through my back door on a Tuesday night in February was not identified. What I have thought about every day since is the mug, not the stare, which frightens me when I think about it, and not the manipulation of the lock, which frightens me more. The mug, because the mug is the part that I cannot make fit into any explanation that is clean and simple. A person who breaks into a house to steal things does not take a mug from a cabinet and set it on the counter and leave it there. A person who breaks into a house with another purpose, some specific and targeted purpose, does not leave behind a mug as evidence of their presence unless they want you to know they were there. Unless the mug is a message. A message that says I was here, I was in your kitchen, I touched your things, I set this down on your counter and I left it for you to find. I know you are here, I know your house, I know how to get in. I had the locks replaced the next morning. I had a security system installed within the week. I have a door sensor on every exterior door that alerts my phone, and I have a camera that covers the back of the house, and I sleep with my bedroom door locked. But I still hear the third stare sometimes, not literally. In my mind, in the specific way that a sound lodges in a memory and replays without warning. The compression and the slight release. The weight of someone who knew enough about my house to be on that stair at 12:17 in the morning without having been invited. The weight of someone I never saw. and never identified. And who has never, in the 4 years since, made themselves known in any other way? Which is its own answer to a question I have never been able to stop asking. Story 2. I'm 35 years old, and I want to start with a confession that is relevant to everything that follows. I am not someone who reads the fine print. I am not someone who examines the details. I am a big-picture person, a gestalt thinker, someone who looks at the whole shape of a situation and makes his assessment from that and moves on. In most areas of my life, this works fine. In the situation I'm about to describe, this quality of mine, this comfortable inattention to detail, very nearly cost me something I cannot fully name and am grateful I did not lose. I bought my house in Madison 3 years ago. It was the first house I had owned, a 2-story colonial in a residential neighborhood, solid and well-maintained, the kind of house that does not announce itself in any way. I moved in on a Saturday in July with the help of 4 friends, and by Sunday night I was alone in it for the first time, and I felt the specific pride of a person who has done the thing that is supposed to mean something in this country, which is own the place where they sleep. I want to tell you about the house's layout because the layout is the thing that everything else hangs on. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 2 up and 2 down, which was more than I needed alone, and which I was using as a home office for one of the downstairs bedrooms and storage for the other. The upstairs had the master and a 2nd bedroom I'd furnished as a guest room. There was a full basement, finished, which I had set up as a recreational space. The house had an attached garage with an interior door leading into the kitchen. I am going to tell you about a space in this house that I did not know about for the first 4 months I lived there. I did not know about it because it was not in the listing. It was not in the inspection report. It was not mentioned by the previous owners during the walkthrough or in any of the disclosures that form the paper trail of a real estate transaction. It was not visible during any of the multiple visits I made to the house before closing. It was not something I had any reason to look for because I had no reason to believe it existed. It was a room. Not a large room. A space of approximately 8 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling, accessible through a door in the basement that I had not opened in 4 months because the door appeared to be a utility closet, and I had my own storage system for the basement that did not require whatever was in that closet. The door was unremarkable. It had a knob, no lock, painted the same color as the surrounding wall. I had opened it once in the first week and found it apparently empty and dark, and had closed it and had not opened it again. I am going to tell you what happened in the weeks before I found the room, because the weeks before matter. 6 weeks after I moved in, I began to notice a smell in the basement. Faint, inconsistent, the kind of smell that arrives and is gone before you can locate it. I attributed it to the finished basement having been closed up before I moved in and needing to air out. I opened the basement windows more. The smell persisted intermittently. 8 weeks and I began finding small things in the basement that I had not placed there. Not large things. A water glass on the bar area of the finished basement that I did not remember putting there. A throw blanket from the upstairs couch that had somehow relocated to the basement sectional. A television remote that I had been looking for upstairs for several days, sitting on the basement coffee table. I attributed all of these things to myself, to the distracted unpacking and settling of a person moving into a new space, to the ordinary displacement of objects in a house where everything was still finding its place. I am a big-picture person. I was not attending to the details. I told myself I had brought the glass down and forgotten it. I told myself I had carried the blanket down on some evening I did not remember. I told myself I had left the remote there without thinking. I told myself all of this for 8 weeks, and I was wrong about all of it. The thing that stopped me telling myself these things happened on a Saturday night in November, 4 months into my ownership of the house. I was alone, which was a typical Saturday for me in those early months, still building my social life in a new city, comfortable in the house and with my own company. I had been watching something on the television in the upstairs living room, and I had come down to the basement around 10 o'clock to get something from the small refrigerator I kept there, and I had gone back upstairs, and I was back on the couch by 10:15. At 11:30, I heard a sound from below me. I want to describe it precisely. I was on the first floor and the basement was below me, and the sound was from the basement, and it was the sound of the television in the basement turning on. The same television I had walked past 90 minutes earlier when it was off. It turned on. I could hear it, at low volume, through the floor. A television turning itself on is not impossible. Some televisions have scheduled power settings that I had not explored on a set that had come with the house. This was my immediate explanation, and I held it for approximately 30 seconds. Then I heard the channel change. The specific double-click of a remote being pressed twice to move 2 channels up from wherever the television had landed when it turned on. A sound I knew because it was my remote on my television, and I had made that sound many times. 2 clicks of a remote. I was on the first floor. The remote was in the basement. I did not move for a long moment. I sat on the couch with the complete stillness of someone whose body has understood something before their mind has finished processing it. Then I stood up, and I went to the kitchen, and I took the largest knife from the knife block, and I held it and I called 911, and I stood in the kitchen, and I told the dispatcher there was someone in my basement. She kept me on the line. I told her I was going to stay in the kitchen near the garage interior door so I could exit through the garage if I needed to. She told me that was a good position and that officers were on their way. I heard the television turn off. Then I heard the door of the basement open, the door at the bottom of the basement stairs, and footsteps on the basement stairs moving upward. Measured, unhurried footsteps, the footsteps of someone who knew where they were going and was not in a rush. The basement door at the top of the stairs, which was in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, was closed. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs, on the other side of the closed basement door. I was in the kitchen, 10 feet from that door, with a knife in my hand and a dispatcher in my ear telling me police were 2 minutes away. The basement door opened. A man came through it. He was in his 40s, average build, wearing dark clothes. He came through the basement door and he saw me in the kitchen and he stopped. We looked at each other across 10 feet of hallway and kitchen. I was holding the knife visibly. I said, loudly and clearly, that the police were on their way and were 2 minutes out and that he needed to stay where he was. He turned. He went back through the basement door. I heard him on the stairs going down, and then I heard, within seconds, a sound from the basement that I did not identify in the moment, but identified afterward, which was the sound of the utility closet door opening and closing. The police arrived. They went into the basement. They found the utility closet, the door I had opened once in the first week and found apparently empty and dark. They opened it and they went in and they found the room. The 8x10 space with the low ceiling. Inside the room there was a sleeping bag on a folded foam pad. There was a 5-gallon water container that was partially full. There were several days' worth of food items in a reusable shopping bag. There was a battery-powered lantern. There was a duffel bag containing clothing and personal items. There was, on the floor beside the sleeping bag, a paperback novel with a bookmark in it indicating it was approximately 2/3 read. Someone had been living in a hidden room in my basement for an estimated period of, based on the food and water supply and the wear on the sleeping bag, several weeks. Several weeks of my 4 months in that house. The man was apprehended 2 blocks from my house. He was identified as a man who had a connection to the property that the investigation established over the following days. He had lived in the neighborhood years earlier. He had known the previous owners of my house. He had known about the room, which was an addition made to the basement at some point in the house's history that had never been permitted or documented, and that the previous owners had apparently treated as dead storage and never disclosed because they had perhaps forgotten it themselves or had simply not mentioned it. He had been in that room while I watched television above him, while I cooked in the kitchen above him, while I slept in the master bedroom above him. He had come out of the room to use the bathroom that was adjacent to the basement utility space. He had taken the glass from the bar and the blanket from the couch and the remote from the coffee table and had returned them imperfectly. He had been watching my schedule, learning when I was upstairs, learning when I was in a deep enough engagement with whatever I was doing to move through the space without my noticing. He had been doing this for weeks, and I had handed him the opportunity by not reading the fine print, by not examining the detail of a door in a basement that appeared to be a utility closet, by being a big-picture person in a situation that required the opposite of that. I am not a big-picture person anymore, not about the spaces I occupy. I read every inspection report line by line now. I open every door in every house I am in, and I look at what is behind it with the full attention of someone who has learned what is behind an unopened door when you choose not to look. I sold that house 14 months after I bought it. I live in an apartment now, smaller and more expensive and without a basement, and I have never once missed having a basement. The room was 8 feet by 10 feet with a low ceiling, and someone had been living in it for several weeks while I lived above it, and I did not know, and I think about it every day. Every single day. I think about the sound of the television turning on, and the 2 clicks of the remote, and the measured, unhurried footsteps of someone who had been below me long enough to be completely comfortable with where they were. Completely comfortable. In my house. In a room I did not know existed.